Hello everyone, it's Marc Sabatella from Mastering MuseScore here, and welcome to the MuseScore Café. So first thing I need to know is, as usual, and that much more so than usual, can you hear me? Can you see me? Because I'm not in my usual location. Yet another one of these regional internet outages where the entire several block area here is without internet, so I'm going from a different location, going through my phone's internet connection, so things could be a little spottier, but in any case, glad that it's basically working here, so apologize in advance if anything else goes wrong as a result. Anyhow, welcome everyone. So this is my regular Wednesday series. We talk about some aspect of making music with MuseScore, and this being the third Wednesday of the month, it's I've been doing a Score of the Month series where we basically, instead of talking about a single topic, I just enter the music of one particular score and we look at everything that comes up along the way. And the music that we're looking at today is the Bach prelude in C major. This is actually a MuseScore edition of it that I'm showing you here that was created some time ago in MuseScore as part of the OpenScore project, but that's not what we're going to be working from. We're going to be working from the Carl Czerny edition for a variety of reasons. One, because I get to talk about Carl Czerny, and also I get to ask you, am I pronouncing that name right? I kind of feel like that's how I've pronounced it my whole life. Czerny, C-Z-E-R-N-Y, right? Carl Czerny. He's the editor of the edition that we're looking at. And so we're going to be looking at this piece, and let me pull it up here. This is the Czerny edition. So when I say it's the Czerny edition, and yeah, please, if anyone wants to call me on pronunciation, now would be a good time before I start saying a lot more silly things. The Czerny, yeah, that sounds good to me. The things that he added are going to be clear a little more if I show you the original manuscript first. So that's what we're going to be doing, is looking at the original manuscript for a moment here. So let me flip over to where I have that. Got to find, I have another window with the original manuscript. It's this guy here. So this is Bach's handwriting that we are looking at. I mean, you know, obviously a scan thereof, but this is Bach's handwriting. So if we look at Bach's original and compare it to Czerny's edition, well, obviously, so this is the Czerny edition here, just in that same window. There's a number of differences we can see. So first of all, obviously Bach's is handwritten, and you know, by some standards, some composer standards, this is pretty legible. A lot of composers are harder to read than Bach was, but at least in this piece, Bach, I mean, he certainly wrote out the word preludium very nicely, and you know, generally speaking, he's writing things pretty well in relatively readable fashion. It's the quality of the scan that's getting more in our way. I'll zoom in. Now that's as far as I can zoom in, but you can find this online. Just you know, do a web search for Bach Prelude in C original manuscript, and it will be happy, you know, to show you. You know, you'll find it on IMSLP or elsewhere. So there's a few things that we can notice here. One is, first of all, these clefs. I don't know what's going on with these clefs. That is a bass clef. This is not a bass clef. The top staff is written in some other staff, in some other clef, right? We're used to seeing E in the top space, E in the bottom space here. But that's not the way Bach had it. His E is there. I mean, the bottom line, right? So E, top space, E, bottom line. That's a standard treble G clef. But Bach's clef is different than that, right? So Bach's clef, this is an E, and that is also an E, even though to us they look like Gs. That is because this clef here is a Baroque style clef. Actually, that's the common time. This is the clef here. So, you know, you have to, if you want to look at original manuscripts from pre, 1750 or so, when we started to kind of standardize on the modern clefs that we use today, you have to know how to read these other clefs. So Czerny's edition, first of all, straightened out the clef situation, but also notice he has a tempo marking in here. He's got the word legato here. He's got fingerings written in. He's got slurs written in. None of that stuff is actually in the original, right? None of that stuff was there in the original. There's no fingerings. There's no slurs. I mean, these guys here are ties. So Czerny, is when we say that someone is the editor of a score, that's part of what we mean, is that they're the ones who added all those sorts of things. And Czerny has sort of a reputation. How would I put this? And Allison, I believe you're right about the soprano clef. I can't read the scan well enough to even be able to decipher that symbol, so I'm just reverse engineering. What I can obviously tell is that it seems to be, if that is a soprano clef telling me that that bottom line is C, that would totally make sense. So I just can't read this smudge here. So Czerny has kind of a reputation as being someone who did a whole ton for Bach's music by putting it out there, publishing it, and modernizing the notation and stuff like that, but also has kind of a reputation as, in some circles, as having gone too far in terms of adding all of these additional markings that weren't present in the original. That's a debate that, someone could have. And I don't know that I would want to take sides in it. I would just say, well, it is what it is. And I want to use Czerny's edition because it has those markings, so we get to talk about how to add them, all right? So that's all I'm going to say for now, at least, about the editions themselves. And now I'm going to flip over to MuseScore and start getting this guy in here. So here is my score. Let me get, so there it is here, because I want to be able to see the score, the PDF in one window while I'm looking at MuseScore in the other, and I kind of worked out good ways of doing that. So yeah, let me actually talk about that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to open a new score for MuseScore, and because it's a piano score, I'm going to either use the piano template or the grand staff. There's 3 different ways to do a piano score, right? You can either choose the grand staff template, or you can hop over to solo and pick the piano template, or you can go choose instruments and keyboards, piano. Any of these are going to do basically the same thing. So I typically just use the grand staff template because it's convenient. I'm often working from templates, and that's already up there. So, but all 3 of those will produce essentially the same results. In theory, the piano template, specifically if I go to solo piano, might have some additional style settings that differ from the default style settings that are specific to piano music. I don't know that that's really the case, but in principle, it's possible. So if you really want to do, give yourself the best starting point, maybe that's what I'd recommend for solo piano music. Create from template, solo piano. All right. And now I usually get anxious and jump the gun and just hit done here and say, okay, I'm ready to start going for music. But no, let's get the actual stuff in here. Because one of the things I want to talk about is getting in some of the things that we see in the original. Okay, so part first. So what's going on here is, this is part of a, the Well-Tempered Clavier, Book 1, but then there's also Well-Tempered Clavier, Book 2, which is a whole separate set of preludes and fugues, right? There's preludes and fugues in all keys that make up Book 1, preludes and fugues in all keys that make up Book 2. And I think this part first is telling me that this is coming from Book 1, and because it's the very first prelude is why we're seeing it there. I'm not going to enter that, but I am going to put in Preludio 1. I mean, I could call it something else, but I will call it Preludio 1. You can totally, do what you want there. And then I'll enter J.S. Bach as the composer. And under the subtitle, here's a nice little clue for you. If you don't type anything under subtitle, you're going to get the word subtitle there. But if I just press a space and delete it, then I won't have subtitle in my score to delete. There's no lyricist or copyright information. The key is indeed C. Time signature is 4/4, but I want it to display as the common sign because that's how Bach did it and that's how Czerny did it. Now, realistically, if I were the editor doing this myself, I'm kind of done with the common time symbol. You know, many modern editors would just write 4/4, but for historical practice purposes, we will write the common time symbol, the C. And since I am just trying to work from the Czerny edition, I'm going to do that. I will also use Czerny's tempo marking, which was 112. So let me select this and go to 112. And the length of the thing, I don't know how long it is. It's going to be more than 32 measures, but I can add measures just as easily as I can delete them. I'll just type 64 for now. And what I could do is look and see if I've got measure numbers that would tell me how many measures it actually is. It looks like it's 33, 34, 35 measures. So I could actually do that. I could get 35 measures. I'm looking at my OpenScore edition here. So I've now entered all the necessary score information and I can say done. And now I have my prelude kind of set up. So I get that set up and then I pull up my PDF. Nope, not that version, but this version here, and pull MuseScore back up. And now I can see everything at once. This is, you know, a little trick that's going to differ for all your systems, but this is how I have it on my Chromebook, where I just overlap my windows like this, and it seems to work pretty well. So that I can see what I'm working on, see what I'm working from, and see the chat. All right. So let's get some notes in here. So the very first measure presents every single problem that we're going to need to solve. And then we just need to solve the same problem over and over and over again. That's one of the cool things about this piece is it really is the same problem to solve over and over and over. So I can really take my time on that first measure, get it perfectly, and then just sort of, you know, copy and paste it elsewhere and fix the notes, and I'll have the right thing. And then I can focus more on some of the formatting stuff, which I think is going to be interesting as well. So let's zoom in a little bit more here. And what I want to do is I'm going to get the left hand in first for that first measure. Why? Because it's easier, right? There's just 2 half notes. So click the measure, N, 6 for half note, C, up an octave with control up, C. And turn my volume back up a bit. And well, I'm basically done with the first measure. Now, one thing you can see is that this measure is very narrow, whereas the real one is much wider. Well, that's because the real one has all those 16th notes. And so once I get all those 16th notes in, this is going to widen. But let's talk a little bit about formatting, because I don't, you know, it looks like Czerny has 2 measures on the first system, and he did that because there's a little bit of an indent there. He's got to show the time signature. He wanted to show the slurs and the fingering, so he didn't want it to be too cramped. So he put 2 measures on the first system. And then he put 3 measures on pretty much all the other systems. There might be some other system in particular where he wasn't able to fit 3 or decided he could fit 4. But for the most part, he's got 3 measures per system after the first one. So what I want to do is I want to go ahead and put the line break in after that second measure right now. I can do that without even leaving note input mode if I think about it. If I hit enter right now, it puts that line break right after the first measure. So I'll hit enter again to remove it. But now I'm just going to enter 2 more half notes because that's really easy. C and C. Now it puts the break after the first 2, which is where I want it, right? After the first 2 measures. So now I've got my line break the way I want. Since I said I wanted to work on the left hand first, let's get the fingering in there. He has a 3 written in on both of those. Frankly, this is part of what I would consider see the note kind of shadowing me. That's the internal term for this thing, is called the shadow note. That's because I'm still in note input mode. I don't really want to be in note input mode now, so I'm going to press escape. Now I can select that C. And there's a lot of ways to add fingering. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to go, I have a shortcut defined for it, actually, I think, if it's on this computer. And I believe if I go to add text fingering, you can see it's Control-Shift-F. I define that myself, not because I use it a ton, but because when you do use it, it's nice to have a shortcut for it. So Control-Shift-F would be the shortcut for that, and I can type my 3. Now, once I'm typing the 3, I can just press a space to move on to the next note, press space again to move to the next note, type the 3 again. So fingering works very much like lyrics or chord symbols in that respect. Fingering just moves on to the next note. So I'm basically done with the first system, left hand. So now we're going to work on the top staff. All right. So by the way, there's a few differences that I should point out about the way things look here. First of all, the font is different. I could spend long time looking for a font that's going to match the other one, but not worth it to me. The other thing is he did the title in the composer's name in all caps, which fine. That's, those are decisions that I wouldn't just copy from Czerny. I would want it to look like my version so that, all my scores look alike. I might obey Czerny's decisions in terms of slurs and so forth, but I'm not going to try to copy his fonts because that's dependent on what publisher he worked for. So I don't want to copy his publisher's choice of fonts. I'm just going to use the fonts that are available to me, which are different than the fonts that were available to him. So there's certain things that I'm not going to worry about trying to copy, but I am going to get the word allegro in there. I'll double click that tempo marking, move to the beginning, and then I think if I try to type allegro, it works. Sometimes, depending on how you do things, if you try to insert text in front of a tempo marking or at the end of it, you might get a weird font thing happen. And if that happens, just I forget the exact sequence that makes it work versus not work. It's been an issue ever since MuseScore 2. I think it's fixed in 4.1 finally, but I guess we'll find out. But this worked just fine. Bach wrote 3.5 bars on many staves. Oh, we got to look at that. So I want to take a look. So Bach's manuscript, you're saying he wrote half bars. Oh my God, this like smudge here, I can't really read. Yeah, this is really hard to read here, unfortunately. But yeah, I can see this looks like half a bar there continuing into this bar. Is that what you're looking at? I think you're right, that he's written 1 bar starting here and then continuing there. Well, this happens when you're writing handwritten scores. It's hard to predict how much space you're going to need while you're writing. And so when you're handwriting scores, you're often going to come to that situation where you have a little bit of room at the end of a system. You're like, should I start a new measure? Should I not? Yeah, you could start it and then continue it on the next line when handwriting it, but there'd be no reason at all to do that in computer type setting unless there's a measure that just literally won't fit. So yeah, that's how I did it, Stephen. I looked at the half. That's how I found it. I saw 3 Fs at the bottom. I said, oh, that's probably a good clue that that's one of the measures. But this scribble here, I can't even make out the half notes. It's the scan is too bad. All right, so let's get that. So I got my tempo marking in there. Allegro quarter note equals 112. And now let's get back to where Czerny's edition is here. And he's got the tempo marking in parentheses. And that makes sense because this looks a little weird. So let me add parens, open, close. Now I'm ready to start entering my notes. So as we enter the notes, notice there's actually 2 voices going on here. The E comes in. Oh yeah, paper's expensive. Was expensive. Less so now, obviously. So you wouldn't just leave space, which is what a lot of people would do, and then just scribble that out to say, no, we're done with this line. If you got to the end of a line and there's space left over, sometimes people would just leave that space, and you'll see that in a lot of original manuscripts. In any case, yeah, we're not going to have to worry about that continuing measures across systems business. But if we get around to it, I'll show you how to do it anyhow. So there's 2 voices here, right? There's the E, which is sustained, and then there's the moving 16th parts. Now, normally I enter voice 1 first because normally that's maybe where the melody is, and 1 comes before 2. I don't know. Normally I would enter voice 1 first. But because when you play this on the piano, we know how it goes. Right? That E is going to be the first note I play in the top staff, and it happens that way every time. I kind of feel like entering voice 2 first, and I'm going to do it just because I can. So N for note input mode, and then I will select it's a dotted. No, the first thing I need is the 16th rest, so 3 0. Next, I need the dotted 8th note, so 4 dot E. Wrong octave, so down an octave. Turn the volume down a little. And then tied to a quarter note, so 5 T. I'm going to enter just that much, because the second half of the measure is identical, right? So I'm going to use copy and paste. I'm going to get the first chunk in there, and then I'm going to copy and paste it, all right? Would I always do it that way? No, but, I'm going to this time. Ooh, I said I was going to enter voice 2, but of course I forgot to enter voice 2. So I got a number of options here. What I think I'm going to do is leave note input mode, select that measure, and just press the voice 2 button on the toolbar. That moves notes into voice 2. You can do that for 1 note at a time or a small selection. If you've got a whole bunch of stuff you want to move from voice 1 to voice 2, you'd go to Tools, Voices, exchange voice 1 and 2. That'll work better. So R, yeah, oh yeah, absolutely, Dave. You're absolutely right. I'm going to use R to copy that as opposed to literally copy and paste. It's conceptually copy and paste, but when I get around to it, it'll actually be the R command. So you're absolutely right. So I've got voice 2 in there. Now I'm going to come back here. I swear I said I was going to do voice 2, but then I clearly didn't. Oh well. I had my fingers on Control Alt, and then I took them off because Control Alt is the Control Alt 2 would have been the shortcut to go to voice 2, and I had my fingers there, and then I didn't press it. Control Alt 1 to go back to voice 1, and now I can enter this part. So it's an 8th rest and then GCE. So I'm in voice 1, 4 0 for my 8th rest. Oh, I didn't move the rest. Look at that. I didn't move my rest. When I selected the stuff, I didn't move that original rest into voice 2. So I'm going to delete this thing and do it again. Okay, I'm just going to do that. I'm going to do what I meant to do. Control Alt 2. So I'm in voice 2. And now 16th rest. So 3 0. Then 4 dot E. Control down. 5 T. All right, now I've got what I want in voice 2. Now Control Alt 1 to go to voice 1. 4 for my 8th rest, 0. And now my 16th notes. G, C, E, G, down an octave, C, E. So that is the first chunk of that, right? Looks more or less like his does. I'm not going to enter I could enter the slur right now because it's going to copy. In fact, let's do that. Now notice the slur connects notes of different voices. It starts on the E, it ends on the other E. MuseScore does allow you to do that. If I click that first E and then control click the last E and then press S, I'm going to get my slur. Now, notice that Cherny put his slur above. When you have cross voice slurs, the rules are kind of ambiguous as for where to put them. Cherny's slur, by putting it above, he was able to clear room for the dynamics and the word legato, but he had to pay for it in terms of having to bow it more to make room for the fingering. 6 of one, half dozen of the other. I'm going to press X to do what Cherny did. And unfortunately, in MuseScore, it's the rules that it follows for, avoiding collisions. There's a number of cases that aren't handled very well. And this is one of them. The cross voice slurs will not be able to fully avoid beamed notes. That is a known limitation. I'm a little curious to know if that's because I know 4.1 has some improvements in this area, and I don't know if that's going to be one of them, but I'll worry about that. I'll just fix this manually because we're only going to do a few slurs, because after that, notice Czerny doesn't put in the slurs. The slurs aren't in there. So Czerny put them in there as a sort of serving suggestion, is what I call it. It's an editorial suggestion that you might want to slur it, but he didn't want to clutter up the whole score. So is voice 2 actually for the left hand? Well, in this particular case, yeah. In this particular case, yes. So, because that is how we would play this. It would be possible to play this with just one hand. You could hold your thumb on the E and play the other notes with your other fingers, but it would be kind of hard to literally hold that E while playing those other notes. And you certainly would not be able to hold this D while playing that upper F. So it wouldn't take you very long of practicing this piece to realize, oh, that voice 2 note has got to be in the left hand. You wouldn't have to play it very long before you realize that was the only practical way of accomplishing it. Yeah, and it would totally be legit to just choose to put it in a different staff. Remember, in the original here, Bach's version was higher up on the staff, right? This is a little higher up on the staff because he's using a different clef. There's also the this is a Breitkopf edition here. The Breitkopf edition does it the same way as Czerny, but doesn't add the slurs or the fingering. But he does put 3 measures on the first system, right? So, and puts 4 measures on the others. So, you know, it's kind of editors, these are the choices that editors make. Rachel makes a really good observation that Czerny is steering us towards playing the E and the G with different hands because he's got 1 on both of them. But of course, Bach didn't do that. That was Czerny's call to do that. And if we look at the Breitkopf edition, it doesn't have any fingerings. So it would be less clear from this one that the E needs to be in the left hand until you try to play it. But also there's a, C, E, or C, E, you're holding those 2 notes and then the other notes move. That just feels natural to play the 2 held notes in one hand and then the moving notes in the other. So it feels like that's going to be more natural to do anyhow. Now, I do have to say, I can't speak for any other pianists, but I feel like, Bach must have literally meant the first 2 notes to be held and the others not to be, but many pianists don't play it that way. Many pianists will use sustain pedal, use the damper pedal over that, and so as a result, all the notes end up being sustained. Now, Bach, of course, would not have done that, but many modern pianists would, or they would follow Czerny's suggestion, quite literally, the legato, and literally just hold those notes so that they're all that kind of arpeggiate and hold pattern that I talked about in my newsletter, which is part of why I brought that up. Button accordion, you can reach further. That is quite cool. I think I could probably pull off this on my melodica as well because the keys are smaller. Anyhow, so these are all, I said, we spent as long as we want on this first measure because after that it's all downhill, right? It's all just more of the same. So what I want to do is I do want to bow that slur to make it not crash into the notes, but I want to get my fingerings in first because I want to make sure I avoid those also. So let's come back over here and I want to click this note here and Shift Alt F was it was Control Alt F, right? Control Alt F was my shortcut. Did I just make a change? No, let me redo that. Okay, it's Control Alt F was my shortcut. Nope, what was it? Shift Alt F. I got to look at my shortcut again. Text. I don't do Control Shift F. Control Shift F. So select my E, Control Shift F. And now I can type in my 1 and then space 1 because I remember from what we just talked about that these were 1s and then a 2 and a 4. So space 2, space 4. And notice MuseScore did seamlessly move from voice 1 to voice 2 when entering the fingerings. Wouldn't have been played on an organ. Now, it certainly could have been played on an organ, but I think, I mean, so someone who's more of a historian about this could answer better, but I believe when Bach used the term clavier, he specifically meant not the organ. Now, he didn't mean piano. It could have been, you know, harpsichord or any number of other keyboard instruments, but I'm pretty sure that term was a term that he would have used to indicate he didn't really mean it to be on the organ. Certainly, he didn't write it as if he was writing for organ because he only wrote it on 2 staves. But it's obviously playable on organ. Pretty much anything you play on piano could be played on organ if it doesn't rely on the damper pedal. I said I was going to copy and paste this thing, and I realized I should have done that before putting in the fingerings, but that's okay. What I'm going to do is select that passage, click here, and then I'm going to use Shift Right to extend the selection, and then press R. And then I'm just going to select those fingerings and delete them. To select those fingerings, I'll use the same approach. Click one, Shift click another, and that selects that whole range of fingerings. Ooh, I should have clicked down here. The first fingering, and then the last fingering, and then delete. And now all those fingerings are gone. So, and yeah, Dave, I did talk about that, the clef thing a bit ago. So yeah, it's definitely a different clef. So, so now I want to figure out how to bow this slur a bit more. When you want to change the shape of a slur, let's look at what's going on. You've got the outer endpoints here, and then you've got kind of this midpoint one here that's not really on the slur, but this is the one you would use to move the slur. And then you've got 3 handles along the curve. Those 3 handles along the curve allow you to change the shape of the curve. And so I could do something weird like that and try to only bow it around the numbers and think that, hey, I'm doing a good job here by only bowing around the numbers because now, and then I can play with the other ones to try to like, ooh, look how clever I am. I've made a slur that avoids the numbers but doesn't get as big as Czerny's did. Yeah, but that looks terrible. You can do that, but you generally don't. Instead, I'm going to press Control-R to reset that slur, X again to flip it above. Normally, we keep slurs symmetrical. Notice that what he did is this shape is pretty symmetric. It's a little off, and that's because this was done by, you know, and I won't say by hand because it was engraved on plates, but it was, yeah, it would have been a very manual process of doing this. In fact, I don't even know how they did slurs back then. Someone could tell me better. But what he did is he raised the start point way above the note so that there was room to play with. Now, what I know is when you start messing with slurs like this, it can be beneficial to disable autoplays for them. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to disable autoplays for that slur because this will allow me to start reshaping it and take full control over it rather than having MuseScore try to adjust as I'm adjusting. So I'm going to now select that first endpoint there, and I'm going to use Control Up to move it up. Up moves it up like a half space at a time. Control Up moves it up a full space at a time. And if I put it just basically, well, he has it between the 2 lines, so I'll do the same. I'll put it where he has it here, which is basically in the middle of that first space. Now, instead of moving the end handle there to kind of curve just around the numbers, I'm going to move the top handle. And I'm going to, if I just use up, it's going to be a little lopsided, but I'll also use left. And I'm just doing this and, you know, I'm eyeballing this to try to get it, you know, his 1 is closer in than my 1. So let's do that. Let's move that 1 in a bit so that we have less to have to fiddle with. Something like that would be okay. At this point, it has moved the slur, move the tempo marking to avoid it, but not enough. So I got to move that guy up a bit more also. So Control Up is moving the tempo marking up. So yeah, I don't love what I had to do with that slur, and I don't love how it looks on Cherny's either. I would rather have not had the slur. And this is why, in some ways, having the slur underneath could have been smarter. This one here, this fingering is also kind of colliding a bit. So I'm going to select it and move it down a bit, control down there also. Yeah, the fingering font that they're using is a smaller, is a bolder font. And I don't like that either because it makes the numbers too prominent. I'm not a fan of bold fingerings personally, because the fingerings, everyone's hands are different. I've made this observation before, but everyone's hands are different. And so putting in a lot of fingering markings is typically counterproductive because whoever wrote those fingerings in, it works for their hand, but it might not work for someone else's. So his fingerings are closer to the beams indeed. So if I move that 2 a bit down, my 4 isn't really having a problem, but I could certainly move it down as well. But the big problem is really that 1. The real thing is that his G is further from his E. Notice that? His G is further from the E than it is in MuseScore. He deliberately added a little extra space, and he did that on account of that dot. So let's talk about that dot. That dot is wrong by modern standards. This dot, the dot normally does indeed go above the line if you only have a single voice. But when you have 2 voices like this, the dots are supposed to normally kind of avoid each other. So this dot should have been below the way MuseScore has it, not above the way Cherny had it. Rules might have been different several hundred years ago. If I want to get that dot to be the way Cherny had it, I could select it, and I think I can press X, and that flips it up. And notice, in doing that, MuseScore added a little extra space for that G, which probably helped the shape of the slur a little bit. So I could totally do that if I wanted to. I'm not inclined to. I don't want to copy everything that Cherny did. It's not my style. So if I select that, I'm trying to press Control R, and apparently that doesn't reset the dot. Maybe if I select the note and press Control R, nope. So I'll come over to the Properties panel and find the dot position and just hit the reset button there, and that will fix the dot position. So yeah, the dot rules are kind of complicated, and when you have chords, especially chords that have like seconds in them, like 2 adjacent notes, they can get complicated. But in general, in multi-voice situations, voice 1 dots go up, voice 2 dots go down so that they stay out of each other's way. So MuseScore is following the standard rule there. And so I could then make a similar adjustment to this slur. But what I'm going to try to do is I'm going to see if I can just copy and paste that slur. If I select that slur and Control C, and then select the first note here, Control V, apparently not. Can I Control Shift drag it? I'm just trying some things. Control Shift drag of a slur. I thought that actually worked. Control Shift drag. There we go. Well, that worked, but it didn't copy the actual adjustments or anything. It just made it another slur. So I kind of would have to, let me just undo those changes. Get back to my slur. I'd have to make a similar adjustment here. But since the fingering isn't there, I don't have to adjust as much. And notice Cherny didn't either. He didn't pull up the start point quite as much. He also moved the start point to the right, right? He moved that start point so it's not directly over the note, but it's like half a space to the left, and that also helped it avoid the 1. So I could do the same here, select that start point, control up a bit and left a bit, and then select that middle point and up and over, and eventually get a curve that I'm happy with, or at least happier with. His looks quite ugly, I think. Mine looks a little better. Mine looks a little better to me, but it's quite subjective. So selection filter, if I had copied, when I copied that first 2 measures to the second 2 measures, if I had used the selection filter to exclude the fingerings from it, that would have worked totally. But it also would have worked. It was just as easy for me to just delete the fingerings later, or I could have copied it before adding the fingerings. So lots of different possibilities here. But if you want to see how that selection filter works, because hey, why not? If I go to View, Selection Filter, I have this here. And now if I select this measure here, Actually, yeah, if I select that measure and then unselect fingerings, and now when I press R, notice it copied everything except the fingerings, which is kind of what I want. So I'm not going to do that because I don't want just exactly that. So you can totally use the selection filter to copy some things, but not others. I still don't love my shape of slur here. I feel like I want to maybe now adjust this point because I want to get it to look a bit more symmetric. And it's kind of a subjective thing when they're angled like that, what's going to look most pleasing. But that looks not, it looks better than his, and that's all I'm going to ask. All right, let's get the dynamics in. Because then I want to talk about formatting the score a bit. Because I said we're going to spend a lot of time on this first measure, and obviously we are, because there's a lot going on in that measure. That's the same thing over again. So let's get the dynamics there. We don't need the view or use a so ready to click that 16th note, but in general, it's useful to attach markings to voice one where possible. It's more likely to work better. So I'm going to select the voice one rest and then go to dynamics and enter the. It's under beat 2 where the word legato appears. So that's expression text. It's telling you how to play, not telling you. Expression is like things like legato versus things like mute, which tells you put an actual physical device into your instrument, right? That's a technical instruction. Technical instructions go in plain font above the staff. Expression goes in italic font below the staff. That's the normal there. Oh, sorry if my voice was breaking up. Sorry about that. But hopefully it stays better. I don't know what might have been going on. I do see my microphone was clipping a little bit, but no, it was probably just the internet being weird because I mentioned I'm using my phone right now. All right, so I want to get the legato text in there as expression text, and that's Control E. So I have that first. I have that voice one note on beat 2 selected, Control E, and now I can type legato. Now notice that Czerny has a particular affectation going on here, legato period, allegro period, Bach period. Why? That's not an abbreviation, and it's not a sentence. Whatever that period was going on, that was a thing that made sense in whatever world he was living in, but that's not our world. There's no reason to put a period after the word allegro or after the word legato. So I've got that first measure. Am I done with the first measure finally? I think I am. I think I've got that whole first measure the way I want. And now I can just select it and copy it. And yeah, I could have used the selection filter to exclude the dynamic and the expression mark, but just as easily I can control click them. So I'll click the P, control click the legato. I can't use shift click because they're of different types. One is a dynamic, one is an expression text. But I can control click them and then press delete to get rid of them. And I did that copy because the notes are basically the same rhythm, just different pitches, right? So I'm going to fix that in a moment, but I'm going to answer Kevin's question first. If I want to change the size of the legato text, text sizes are over here in the properties panel. So here's the size there, and I could make it bigger if I wanted. I could make it smaller if I wanted. And then if I decide I want all the expression text in the whole piece to be bigger, like if I want to make this text bigger for some reason, make it 14 point, I could click the ... and say, save as default style for this score. And then when I do that, if I now add another expression text here, it's also that size, right? So that would totally work, except I don't want it bigger. It's a good size already by default. I think it is. It was chosen specifically by a professional engraver, all the default sizes. So unless you've got a really specific reason to override the sizes, I wouldn't be in a hurry to do it. a specific reason could be you're working for a publisher who has a house style that uses separate sizes, or you have a collection of pieces and you want to make them all the same size based on the size they were in something else that you're copying from. But in general, I would say don't second guess the sizes. They are chosen by a professional engraver. So that's my answer there. So let's talk about getting these pitches fixed up here. I mentioned before repitch mode. I'm going to use that. I'm going to use repitch mode. So I long tap on that icon. I talked about that last week's newsletter, and then say repitch existing notes. And now I can go in here and just start typing the new notes in voice 1. It's A, D, F, A, down an octave, D, F, A, down an octave, D, F, A, down an octave, D, F. Notice I didn't have to worry about the rest. I didn't have to worry about like if the rhythm had changed in there. All I had to do was type the pitches. Now I can go back to the beginning of the measure in voice 2 and do the same thing, voice 2, and get that E. Oh, it's a D, sorry, D. And notice it fixed the note and the note it was tied to, and then type D again. And now I'm done with that. I went to repitch mode to change the pitches, and that's all I needed. Normally, I forget to leave repitch mode, so when we switch back to the default step time input mode. Marlos makes a good point about using larger sizes if you're working with people with low vision. One thing that I will say, though, is you want to make the whole staff bigger then, right? And so if you make the whole score bigger, which you would do in format, page settings, you would, increase the whole staff space size here. When you do that, the text size gets bigger along with it, but sometimes you don't want it to be as big because sometimes it's going to relatively stay the same size, like the size of the text compared to the size of the notes will stay the same. But good editing would mean not doing that. Like really you want to be a little more careful about the relative sizes of things because some things should get bigger. Like stems are going to get too thick too fast if you just increase the staff size like that. Stems get too cluttered looking, and it can be then useful to go into the style settings to thin out the stem. So there's a whole sort of a art/science to making these large print editions. And there's a whole article on the MuseScore.org website called Modified Stave Notation is the official British term for it from the Royal National Institute for the Blind. Modified stave as opposed to staff because it's British notation, and it's a whole system, a whole series of things they talk about for how to scale things in appropriate ways that make sure that things scale appropriately so that it's not just everything scaling together. So it appears that in my fiddling with the staff size there I accidentally ruined my fingering adjustments. So I'm just going to be real quick about this and refix those because apparently doing that and undoing didn't do a sufficiently good job, and I can't be bothered to worry about it right now. So I'm just going to do a quick hand adjustment of that. There we go. So now that I've got this in here, and then similarly here, those slurs are wonky now, and let me just reset it and then flip it back and then do a quick and a quick just sort of eyeballing these things. So what I wanted to talk about next, though, now that I've got those measures in, I can now make another copy of this measure. And this time I don't want the slurs either, so I can delete those because, right, the Czerny version stops having slurs. And then I'm just going to repeat that measure a bunch of times because we know it's over and over again the same measure, right? It's the same rhythm, the same everything. So I'm just going to press and hold R to fill up my score with that same thing. And now, because I know I want 3 bars per line, kind of from here on out, I'm going to select from here to the end. Shift, Control, End. And apparently I lost my thing showing me my keystrokes. That's curious. But whatever. Shift Control End is what I just pressed. And now I can go to Format, Add Remove System Breaks, and say that I want them every 3 measures. Boom. And now I've got system breaks every 3 measures to the end of the score. And the reason I wanted to do that is because I do want to talk a little bit more about the formatting. So let me flip back over to Czerny's version and see how much did he fit on the first page. Well, it looks like he fit after the first system 1, 2, 3, 4 systems, and then there's some text. I mentioned when I put this in the notation projects area for people to try working on this themselves, I said, well, you don't worry about the text, but it's kind of fun to talk about how to get that text in there. So I want to do that. So what we want is 4 more systems after that first one, and then some text. So when I come back to my score, here's my first system, then 1, 2, 3, 4. That's exactly what I've got. So I'm going to select this last measure here. I think in MuseScore 4, I can now append a vertical frame after it. I'm not positive if that's supported. So I'll hit that plus, frames, append vertical frame. It's either going to go right after this one, or it's going to go at the end of the score. Yeah, it went at the end of the score. So never mind that. That's MuseScore 3 never had a way of doing that. I thought maybe they had added one in MuseScore 4, but apparently not. So instead, I go to the next measure and go back to there and say, add, I want to insert a vertical frame. And vertical frame is what I want. Vertical frame is going to allow me to, first of all, vertical means it's between 2 systems. Horizontal frame would be between 2 measures, but this is between 2 systems. So I want a vertical frame. I'm going to insert it. And notice it doesn't quite fit on this page. Well, that's because I have a smaller page and or larger staff size than Czerny did. So I'm going to worry about that a little later. But I do want to put that text in, and then I'll see if I can fix that page thing, and then we'll have done what I wanted to do here. So I want to put these pieces of text here. I've got a German text here, I've got an English text, and I've got a vertical divider, all right? So I've got my frame. What I'm going to do, I've learned from experience, is enter right to left. So I'm going to right-click that frame and say Add Text. And I'm going to just type German text. And now I can come over here under Appearance and just change its horizontal offset to start moving it to the right, or I can just type in a number like, say, 50. And that's not enough. I'm just guessing at what the numbers are. Now I'll say it's 100. Nope, still not enough. It's 150. I'm just sort of guessing at some sizes here. Too much? All right, 125. And then I can still, click this thing and use like Control left arrow to kind of put it where I want it. And I want to just note where it looks like actually 100 was good enough. I like round numbers. I'm silly that way. I do like round numbers. So let me click in here again, Appearance, and just put in, oops, that's the frame I've selected. I want to select the actual text. I'm just going to type in 100 into there. Get it down to 100. Sometimes it's hard to get to the point where I can type. Okay, so I've got my German text in there. Now I'm going to go back in here, add text, English text. Now I want to get actually that vertical dividing bar here in there also. So I'm going to add another text and say add text. And this time I'll just type the vertical bar, enter, vertical bar, enter, vertical bar, enter. And now I've got vertical bar, and I can go ahead and select it and give it an offset of, say, 90 if I can get to the point where I've correctly selected it. Because I want to not select the frame, I want to select the text. So let's go with 90. And now I've got my vertical bar in there. Now notice the vertical bar, those vertical segments don't totally line up because MuseScore is going to add a little extra space in there, but I can affect that space by going to the properties panel again, closing that appearance section. And down here where it says more, you'll see line spacing, and I can decrease that until those segments kind of merge. Okay, that was kind of nice. And then I can add a couple more segments, and now I got myself a dividing line. There's probably other ways of getting yourself vertical lines. There's ways of using Unicode characters or whatever, but it did the job. And now I have something that at least somewhat resembles what Cherny had here, or what his publisher put in there. And yeah, Stephen, absolutely, the Breitkopf edition is simpler. But I wanted to look at Cherny so we could talk about things like fingerings and slurs and so forth, right? So I was interested in talking about those things, even if it's not as exactly faithful. So what I do want to talk about next, though, is, well, why isn't this fitting? And, the way Cherny's did. And there's a few reasons for that. One is like his composer, where he has the amount of space he's taking up with that title is a little bit different. And he's allowing there to be very little space between staves and between systems. And MuseScore is wanting to put a little more. So I want to fiddle with those things. Like his composer here is down like lower, closer to the staff, and his tempo is closer to the staff. Let me control down that to get a little closer. And that, sure enough, just moving that tempo text. I just hit that tempo text and move control down to move it closer to the music. I previously moved it further away. That was enough right there to get that frame to show up, to fit on this page. But I know also full well, as soon as I put in enough text here, it's maybe not going to fit anymore. I'll have to expand that frame to fit that text so the text doesn't go off the page. And so by the time I increase the size of that frame enough, it's going to still go down to the next page. So I want to talk about what else I can do. Well, one of those things that I can do is go to Format, Page Settings, and just decrease the size of the staff space a little bit. The default staff space size, 1.75. If you think about a staff of 5 lines, that means 4 spaces. 4 times 1.75 works out to 7 millimeters. This 1.75 default staff space gives you a 7 millimeter tall staff. That's appropriate for instrumental parts. It's good for, like, if you're reading on a music stand that's like a whole violin distance away from you and you're moving your arms and all this, that stand is further away from you. The desk on a piano is a little closer to you than it is for a violinist reading off a music stand. So we can afford to go a little smaller here. And I am using letter size here. So Allison, you asked about that, and I definitely knew that. Cherny is not working with letter size. He's not using A4 either, right? That probably predates the A4 convention. Who knows what size Cherny was working from? So in general, what I might decide if I were really doing this is maybe it just doesn't make sense to have my page break where Cherny had it. Maybe it just doesn't. And maybe I should just I should have put that frame on a different system. Well, that's fine. I could have chosen that. But I'm going down this road, so I'm going to keep going down this road. So I can decrease this size. And if I just make it, say, 1.65 or something like that, that decreases the size enough where I can fit the frame better, and it's still not too small. You wouldn't want to go smaller than 6 millimeters for the staff size, which would be 1.5 for the staff space. You wouldn't want to go smaller than that for piano music, but anywhere in here is okay. But it's also definitely the case that music is not normally printed on letter size paper for piano. It's printed on larger than letter size paper in the United States. It's usually like 9x12 or something of that ballpark. So, but we don't have easy access to sizes other than letter in the United States or A4 in the rest of the world. So A4 is a little taller, and you might have a little better time fitting it. So let's say that I did this and then decided, yeah, I was better off not having this frame here after the fifth system, but I should have put it up a system. It's too late to move the frame, but it's not too late to move the measures. I can select these measures, click, and then shift click, and then I'm going to use what I'm going to do is first, I got to think about this. I got to select the content. So I select the full measures and Control C to select their contents. Then Control Delete to delete the measures. And now come down below that frame and use Insert Measures. I'll just use the menu, Insert Measures, Insert Measures before selection, which pops up a dialog, and I say I want 3 of them. So now I've got 3 measures that, after that frame, and now I can paste into them, and then I can put a system break, a page break on that frame. Select the frame, hit Control Enter, and now I have what's probably a better solution. Now, does that then make the whole thing take too many pages? I don't know. You get to play with those decisions, like this is push things onto a third page. So maybe I do make things smaller. Those are all decisions you get to make. But at least I've showed you how to be doing these things, right? So that's the story. And I did, post this in the notation projects space earlier in the month, hoping that people would start working on this and come up with other questions about the process. So hopefully this inspires you to give this a shot. But yeah, by looking at this piece, we're able to look at a lot of different things, from note entry to multiple voices to slurs and fingering and copy and paste and repitch mode and text and frames and all these sorts of things. To decrease the amount of space between systems, that's a good thing. What I'll say is MuseScore has different settings for this. Let me show you that, and then we'll wrap up. Format, style, page. What you'll see is there's a minimum system distance here. And what you'll find is that's already pretty close. And you probably don't want to decrease it. If I do decrease it, though, MuseScore will allow more to fit on the page, but it's going to possibly look crowded. It's possibly going to look too crowded. So, but here's where you can affect that minimum system distance here in format, style, page. All right. So let me flip back to my theme music so we can get some sound coming out of here. So thanks for being here. Thanks for bearing with the whatever audio thing went on. And I'm glad that other than that, my internet issues didn't cause any worse problems. So this has been Cafe. Next week, I'll probably be using this as an opportunity to start talking about combining material from different scores, because that's what I'm going to be doing for the canon, the community canon. And that's what we're going to talk about tomorrow in the music master class, is people's submissions for the canon and the process maybe of trying to combine things from a musical perspective. And then next week, I'll probably be talking about the process of combining from different scores from a MuseScore perspective. So, thanks again, everyone, and I will be seeing you next time. So goodbye. I'm just letting this thing play out, and I just will talk while it continues to vamp, because what else am I going to do? I don't need it to repeat this many times today, but that's life. So tomorrow in the Music Master class, if anyone else has submissions for the community canon, please get them in. Certainly get them in by the end of the week, but by tomorrow if possible, so I can actually take a look at your specific submissions and give feedback. So now I will see you next time.